Hi, my name is Jenny Feick. Welcome to the seventh in a series of educational videos for the Great Divide Trail Association. This is the third of 4 videos on the fauna or animals of the Great Divide. This one focuses on some of the vertebrates. The Great Divide Trail Association is committed to reconciliation, which starts by taking this and every opportunity to acknowledge our honor and privilege to live, work, and play within Treaty 7 territory. We honor and acknowledge that the GDT passes through traditional Indigenous territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Yahe Nakoda, the Tsutsina, the Cree, the Sequapen, and the Klekletana, the Tanaha, Sinixt, and Métis. The Great Divide Trail Association would like to invite you to advocate for what you love and to preserve nature for future generations. And to do this while educating yourselves and others on Indigenous history and perspectives. This video is the 7th in a series of natural history-oriented presentations called the Nature of the Great Divide series. This Nature of the Great Divide talk focuses on some of the vertebrates, and they're the ones that you might encounter while you are along the Great Divide. These are the fish, reptiles, amphibians, and birds. Before I begin the talk, I'll share a bit about my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Biology with a minor in Physical Geography, a Master's in Environmental Science, and a PhD in Natural Resource Geography. And all of these are from the University of Calgary. So I had a career with Parks Canada, and that lasted 25 years. It was coast to coast, and I worked first as a park naturalist in Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks, and then in Waterton Lakes and Kootenay National Parks, and then various other positions in planning, research, and management in both the Western and Atlantic regions. Then from 2000 to 2012, I managed various programs in the British Columbia Ministry of Environment. And these included habitat protection, terrestrial ecosystem science, stewardship outreach, climate change and climate change adaptation for nature, and environmental policy. And I retired from full-time work in 2012. And my husband, wildlife biologist Ian Hatter, and I now live in Invermere, British Columbia, where we are much closer to the GDT than when we lived in Victoria. In terms of my connection with the GDT and the GDTA, I was one of the so-called original 6 on the Project Great Divide Trails crew in 1974, who surveyed the route between Waterton Lakes and Banff National Parks. I was one of the founders of the first iteration of the Great Divide Trail Association, a past board member for several years, and a past president for 1 term. I have hiked a lot of the GDT in sections over the years, although not anything north of Wilmore Wilderness Park yet. When the GDTA was resurrected in 2013, I rejoined and started volunteering on trail work parties and also writing articles for the GDTA's Pathfinder newsletter. Lastly, I am the compiler and editor of both editions of Tales from the Great Divide, vignettes on the origins and early history of Canada's Great Divide Trail and Great Divide Trail Association. And this is a self-published compendium of stories from individuals involved firsthand in the start and development of the GDT and the GDTA. Here's what I will cover in this talk. I'll outline where vertebrates, particularly the fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds, fit within the hierarchy of life, biodiversity, and the animal kingdom. I will then talk about where fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds live in the Great Divide area, as well as their ecological roles. And I'll spend most of the time talking about the fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds that live near the Great Divide that you're likely to see. And then I'll wrap up with a few suggestions on how to safeguard nature along the GDT. So going back to this hierarchy of life diagram that I've shown in preceding videos in this series, this is the third video where I discuss members of the animal kingdom, the fauna that live in the vicinity of the Great Divide. And there is one more on animals after this. When one considers the diversity of life on Earth, its biodiversity, vertebrates are what we usually think of. Yet, taken as a whole, vertebrates constitute just 3 to 5% of all animal species. While the majority of animal species on the planet are classified as invertebrates, animals that lack a backbone or spinal column comprised of vertebrae containing the spinal cord, we tend to be most familiar with the creatures with backbones, the vertebrates. Within the vertebrates, there are jawless fishes, as well as vertebrates with jaws, including the cartilaginous fishes, bony fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. In this video, I focus primarily on the bony fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and birds found in the Great Divide area, and mammals are the focus of the next video in this series. As I mentioned in previous videos, in the vicinity of the Great Divide, altitude creates 3 distinct major vegetation zones. Animals have the advantage of being able to move across these different vegetation zones. Nevertheless, you will encounter different vertebrate species at different elevations. Due to the harsher weather conditions up high, it gets increasingly difficult for vertebrates to survive the higher up the mountain you go. The most species tend to live in the valleys and on the lower slopes of the montane forest zone. Fewer species are found in the subalpine forest zone, and the fewest survive in the alpine zone. No reptiles, very few amphibians, few native fish species, and only several bird species can survive above the montane zone. Timing is everything. Many bird species live in the Rocky Mountains from spring until late summer or early autumn, but then fly south for the winter, and only a few can tough it out for the winter. Fish, amphibians, and reptiles do not have that option of long-distance migration. Amphibians and reptiles hibernate to escape Rocky Mountain winters, whereas cold, tolerant, bony fish tough it out under the ice, seeking areas of unfrozen water that still contain enough oxygen for survival. In the Rockies, you will be more likely to see amphibians and reptiles during the heat of the day. Whereas in the spring and also in the summer, bird song and bird activity will be most pronounced at dawn and dusk. Like a lot of fish, trout are photosensitive and do not like bright light. This puts their peak activity level at morning, evening, and night, as well as on cloudy days. Fish which cannot breathe air must live in aquatic habitats. They need running water and/or bodies of water that do not freeze solid during the winter. Amphibians require aquatic habitats for much of their life cycle. They tend to do better in shallow wetlands, ephemeral ponds, and tiny headwater streams that do not bear fish, as fish are major predators of amphibians during all stages of their lives. Certain species of birds depend on flowing water, and others on water bodies during their life cycle. Others depend on snow for cover and camouflage during the winter. The terrestrial habitats within the Great Divide area host amphibians for the adult part of their life cycle. Although a land-based species in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, western terrestrial garter snakes tend to forage near aquatic habitats, looking for, among other things, frogs to eat. A huge array of bird species live in the montane and subalpine forest zones, and several frequent the alpine tundra. And some fly between habitats, while others stay in a small, defined territory. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds play key roles in ecosystem processes, including food web dynamics in the Great Divide area. Nearly all of these groups of vertebrates prey on other species and, in turn, serve as food for other organisms. Many have symbiotic relationships with other species in the same habitats. And many host parasites, usually invertebrates, but also some protists and bacteria. I highlighted a few of the invertebrate parasites in video number 5 on worms and snails that are particularly relevant to fish, amphibians, and birds. In particular, amphibians are a crucial link between aquatic and terrestrial food webs, cycling energy and nutrients between the two systems by the alternation of terrestrial and aquatic life stages. Certain vertebrates have relationships with other organisms that are mutually beneficial, and this is called mutualism. For example, the relationship between common ravens and wolves, timber wolves, which has been studied extensively, is among the best well known. Wolves can provide food for ravens through their kills. On the other hand, ravens can help wolves find unknown carrion or even potential prey. Ravens are very social birds, and upon finding a weak, sick, wounded, or dead animal, they tend to make a lot of noise. The racket alerts animals such as wolves that a food source is nearby. Ravens preferentially associate with wolves, especially in the winter, and they do this as a foraging strategy. Ravens have been observed playing with wolf puppies at den sites in Yellowstone National Park and forming relationships with individual wolves in a pack. We don't usually think of vertebrates as pollinators, but rufous hummingbirds play an important role in the pollination of certain wildflowers in the Canadian Rockies. Their long beaks and tongues draw nectar from tubular flowers like these pink monkey flowers along the High Rock Trail in Alberta, and these bush penstemons near Astor Lake in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park in Alberta. Pollen gets carried on both their beaks and feathers. Unlike bees, hummingbirds can see the color red and are attracted to anything with a red, pink, or purple hue. So if you are wearing a red, pink, or purple hat, you may hear a loud buzz by your ear as a hummingbird checks you out. Incidentally, scientists have discovered that fish indirectly help spread pollen among flowers that are near water. That's because they eat dragonfly larvae, which live in freshwater ponds and other water bodies. Adult dragonflies are major predators of bees, butterflies, and other insect pollinators. Birds also play a vital role in seed dispersal due to their ability to traverse vast distances in short periods of time. Birds disperse plant seeds in several different ways. While feeding, they accidentally knock some seeds from the stems, cones, or flower heads that they're feeding on. Once the seeds contact the soil, they could germinate into a new generation of plants. When eating food, especially fruit, birds digest the fleshy part and then pass the seeds out along with their droppings. Some plants have actually evolved their dispersal strategies to require that seeds pass through a bird's digestive system before they can actually germinate. Birds can also carry seeds that stick to their feathers or that are in the mud or soil on the bottom of their feet. And they can disperse seeds hundreds of kilometers in this way. Members of the corvid family, or crow family, jay family, it's sometimes called, store food in various locations to eat later. And chickadees do this as well, also nuthatches. As they fly off with a seed or fruit to their storage area, they may drop some morsels, which will then fall to the ground and overwinter and germinate where they land. On occasion, these birds will forget where they have hidden or buried their seeds, or their own lives may come to an end before they have had a chance to return to their storage location. The seeds then have a chance to establish themselves in the new area. I'll spend most of the rest of the talk helping you identify some of the vertebrate animals you are most likely to see, hear, or find evidence of along the GDT. This video covers bony fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds. All four groups have a backbone and a central nervous system. All have a skull encasing a brain and a backbone protecting the spinal cord. All have an endoskeleton, which is an internal skeleton with soft tissues such as muscles, connective tissue, skin all around that. All have bilateral symmetry. And also all vertebrates have blood and a more complex closed circulatory system than do invertebrates. The amount and speed of that blood flowing to and within the skin affects an animal's body temperature. Ectotherms are animals that don't have the ability to retain the heat generated by their metabolism. When it's cold outside, the metabolism of ectotherms slows down, as does their ability to move. That's why fish, amphibians, and reptiles can be found sunning themselves in the morning. Doing this helps to raise their body temperature and allows the chemical activity in their cells to speed up. Endotherms are animals that keep their body temperature stable as a result of their metabolism. Endotherms have developed systems involving fat storage, sweat glands, fur, or feathers to retain heat or release it into the environment as required. Birds and mammals are vertebrate endotherms. Chickadees have incredible adaptations, enabling them to survive the frigid temperatures of a Rocky Mountain winter. Among the vertebrates, besides the bony fishes that I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about, there are also two other types of fish that do not appear today in the Canadian Rockies. These are the superclass of jawless fishes, and within the infraphylum of jawed fishes, the class of cartilaginous fishes. It's interesting, they're not around today in this area, but their ancestors appear in the fossil record in the Burgess Shales in Kootenay National Park. And one in particular I am going to point out very special fossil, which is really a kind of missing link. And when scientists from the Royal Ontario Museum found this missing link fossil in the Burgess Shale deposits in Kootenay National Park in 2012, it reminded us that what is now the Canadian Rockies used to be a warm, shallow sea 505 million years ago. The climate and life on our planet were very different during the Cambrian era than they are today. And this Metaspridina thrived long before any of the vertebrate groups I will talk about that live in the vicinity of the Great Divide Trail today. The class bony fishes has several common characteristics. All bony fishes live in water, use gills to breathe, have swim bladders that help them move or stay in the right place in the water column, so not floating up to the surface or sinking down to the bottom, sort of like ballast, I guess. And they also all have fins for directional movement as they move through the water column. They are all ectothermic, which is a trait they share with many invertebrates, as well as the amphibians and reptiles. And they are covered with scales that need to be kept moist. And this is why most fish are also covered in a layer of mucus or slime, which can protect against pathogens such as bacteria, fungi, and viruses, and reduce surface resistance when the fish swims. Unlike reptiles, the overlapping scales of bony fish are made of enamel and dentine, like teeth, and they can be detached individually from the skin. There are 40 species of fish found in all of the freshwater aquatic ecosystems in Canada's Rocky Mountains. It is highly unlikely that you will see more than a few of them while hiking the GDT. Many of these species are not native to the waters of the Rockies and have caused a lot of problems for the native species since they were introduced for sport fishing. The greatest fish species diversity is in Upper Waterton Lake at the southern end of Section A of the GDT. One of the formerly common and now vulnerable native fish species is the bull trout, formerly called the Dolly Varden. The bull trout is not really a true trout. It is actually a char species with a relatively large head and jaw, which is how the term bull originated. Before the early 1900s, bull trout were plentiful throughout the mountains and foothills of Western North America on both the eastern and western slopes of the divide. Their numbers have plummeted, and the small isolated populations that remain are vulnerable, especially to overfishing, because this species readily takes bait, and it also hybridizes with another char, the brook trout. Another native species is the long-nosed sucker, which is most abundant in clear, cold streams and lakes. In the springtime, so April to mid-July, males develop bright red colors on their bodies. Along with the females, they then migrate into small tributaries where spawning takes place over gravel under riffles. They are called suckers because their mouths are on the bottom of their faces, and they have big fleshy lips to help them suck up food from the stream beds. These suckers eat a lot of freshwater algae, as well as midge larvae and most aquatic invertebrates. They are the river's cleanup crew, keeping the system clean by eating decomposing organic matter that would otherwise foul up the water. Their abundance makes them a key food source for trout and pike, as well as ospreys, fishers, river otters, and bears that are fresh out of hibernation. A deadly threat to fish has recently been introduced to the Great Divide area. Whirling disease is caused by a tiny invasive parasite called Myxobolus cerebralus that is related to corals, anemones, and jellyfish. In 2016, human beings unintentionally introduced this parasite to Johnson Lake in Banff National Park, Alberta. And since then, the foreign parasite has spread to other aquatic habitats in the vicinity of the Great Divide. Whirling disease kills young salmonid fishes, including whitefish, trout, and salmon. Bull trout and brown trout can get infected, but the effects are less severe than they are in rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, brook trout, and mountain whitefish. This disease damages the cartilage in an infected fish's backbone, and that causes it to swim in an abnormal whirling pattern. Other symptoms include a bent and darkened tail, deformed heads, and bulging eyes. The parasite has a complex two-host life cycle that alternates between a bottom-dwelling Tubifex worm and a salmonid fish. You can learn more about this parasite's life cycle in videos number 2 and number 5. Symptoms of whirling disease are most likely to be observed in fish that are too small to catch by angling and thus are often missed by anglers. Amphibians are four-limbed vertebrates that are ectothermic. They spend part of their life in the water and part of their life on land. Their eggs are laid in the water and their larval stages develop in aquatic environments. Adult amphibians spend part of their time on land, but usually stay close to water or at least seek out moist environments. Most amphibians breathe through their skin as well as their nostrils and lungs. Their skin has to stay wet in order for them to absorb oxygen, so they secrete mucus to keep their skins moist. If they get too dry, they cannot breathe properly and will die. There are 4 species of amphibians in the southern Canadian Rockies. Besides the western toad, which is fairly common, there are 2 frog species. The Columbia spotted frog, which is an at-risk species in Alberta, and the wood frog. There's also a salamander, the long-toed salamander, designated as a vulnerable species. Only the western toad is known to survive north of Jasper and into the Kakwa area of the GDT. The only ectothermic vertebrate that you are likely to see just about anywhere while hiking along the GDT is the western toad, formerly called the boreal toad. You will probably notice that the adults with their large wart-like bumps and the prominent light-colored stripe down their backs. They lack the cranial crest and elevated ridge on top of their head between their eyes that other toads typically have. By the way, the warts on the western toad are not warts at all, but glands that produce a bitter, sticky, white fluid when the toad feels threatened. The fluid can cause a potential predator's eyes or mouth to tingle or even go numb. This makes western toads unpleasant to eat. Handling toads will not give you warts, but it is not a good idea, as you can transmit fungal, bacterial, viral, and other diseases to the toad from your hands. In ponds along the GDT and even in puddles on the GDT in early summer and as late August in higher elevations, you might observe the distinctive black tadpoles of the western toad. These tadpoles feed on filamentous algae and organic detritus and scavenge carrion. The black pigment contains a toxin that makes the tadpoles unpalatable to predators like fish and newts. Unfortunately for them, the toxin does not work on predaceous diving beetles, giant water bugs, back swimmers, another type of invertebrate insect, terrestrial garter snakes, herons, ducks, crows, and ravens, which love to consume toad tadpoles. If you are very lucky, you might see or get a glimpse of a well-camouflaged metamorph or toadlet right after they emerge from the water and start the terrestrial phase of their lives. These tiny young adults often end up as food for Columbia spotted frogs, garter snakes, many birds, and mammals, as they have not fully developed their toxic defenses. Of the 2 frog species that are possible to see in the Great Divide area, the Columbia spotted frog is the one you are more likely to observe. You can distinguish either frog species from the western toad by the 2 ridges of skin that run from the frog's head partway along the back. The Columbia spotted frog's eyes are set so that they are angled slightly upwards, and that's not the case with the wood frog. Rarely found far from water, Columbia spotted frogs make their homes in or near cool, relatively permanent lakes, ponds, slow-moving streams, and wetlands between 950 to 2,000 meters above sea level. So, like the western toads, they can live in all 3 vegetation zones in the Rockies, even the alpine. They need water bodies deep enough, though, that they do not freeze to the bottom, as the overwintering adults, the juveniles, and their tadpoles spend the winter submerged in the mud at the bottom of these water bodies. Wood frogs, identified by the dark mask around their eyes, live in shallow, impermanent wetlands with no fish. They possess the biologically miraculous ability to freeze solid during their winter hibernation. This enables them to colonize ephemeral wetland habitats further north than other amphibians. As winter approaches, wood frogs burrow under a thin layer of leaf litter and twigs. The wood frog's liver produces large amounts of glucose that flushes into every cell in its body. The syrupy solution prevents the cells from freezing and binds the water molecules inside the cells to prevent dehydration. The wood frog's body allows ice to form around the outsides of cells and organs, but prevents ice from forming inside the cells and organs, thus avoiding the lethal damage suffered by most animals when they freeze. For the entire winter, the wood frog is like a lump of hard, frigid, icy stone carved in the shape of a frog. But it's alive. It's in a state of suspended animation. In spring, the wood frog thaws from the inside out. It gets the jump on other amphibians that need to wait for the ice on ponds and lakes to melt. The long-toed salamanders live in the major river valleys in the Rocky Mountains. However, GDT hikers rarely see them as they tend to be nocturnal. The best opportunities would be low elevation, moist areas in the montane forest zone within 900 meters of wetlands or ponds that don't have fish in them, and near places like Waterton, Banff, Jasper town sites, Field, and the Crow's Nest Pass. Long-toed salamanders typically spend most of their lives in terrestrial habitats and travel to ponds to breed. If not eaten by its primary predator, fish, adult salamanders can live for 7 to 10 years. You can distinguish the larval stage of the long-toed salamander, which is called a newt, from a toad or a frog tadpole by its feathery gills. Habitat destruction, pesticides, and non-native species all play a role, but the biggest threat to amphibians globally is the chytrid fungus, which causes a skin disease that interferes with the amphibian's ability to respire through its skin. 2 species of chytrid have already caused the extinction of nearly 200 species of amphibians worldwide in the past 20 years. For example, this fungus has already almost completely wiped out all of the western toads in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. It has been found in amphibian populations in Alberta. Amphibians also suffer from other diseases and parasites, some of which I mentioned in previous videos, as well as pollution from microplastics and chemicals. They are the most threatened vertebrate group worldwide, and many believe they are the canary in the coal mine, warning us of environmental threats. Reptiles are ectothermic vertebrates that can live in their entire life on land because they have dry, scaly skin that protects them from the drying effects of the air. Also, they use internal fertilization and they lay leathery eggs. Most types of reptiles have 4 short legs with long tails, other than the snakes, which don't have legs at all. There is only one species of reptile, the harmless western terrestrial garter snake, which you might be lucky to see sunning itself on the trail in lower elevation areas. But no doubt it will try to slither away as quickly as it possibly can. As soon as it detects your presence, probably it will feel the vibrations of your footfalls through its skin or smell you with its tongue before it actually sees you. These snakes prefer an aquatic diet of small frogs, newts, salamanders, toads, and their larvae, as well as freshwater leeches, worms, and small fish. A small population of the endangered painted turtle has been found recently in Waterton Lakes National Park, but that population is not right along the GDT. It's possible, though, that they could do well and move and show up in some of the shallow ponds along the GDT. Generally, the climate of the Canadian Rockies is not conducive to supporting reptiles. Winters are too long, too cold, with months of frozen ground and deep snow. Several characteristics distinguish birds from other classes of vertebrates. Most birds have lightweight skeletons with hollow bones. This keeps them light enough for flight. Many fused bones, including the collarbones or wishbones, make bird skeletons rigid in comparison to mammals. This helps brace the bird's wings during flight. Their sternums or breastbones are large, providing sturdy attachment points for powerful wing muscles. Other features of birds include feathers, beaks, wings, eggs, and their songs. Feathers are the defining characteristics of birds, found on every living species of bird and no other class of animal. Feathers are made of keratin, the same substance that forms hair and nails in other animals, and are actually highly modified scales. Feathers are critical for flight and also for warmth and protection against the elements. All birds have beaks or bills made of a bony core surrounded by a thin layer of keratin. Birds do not chew their food, but cut, squish, grind, or rip it into pieces small enough to swallow. The shape of a bird's beak indicates the bird's general diet. All birds have wings, although not all birds fly, and birds are not the only animals to fly. However, the average bird wing is a remarkably complicated thing. The bone and muscle part is relatively small, and most of the visible surface area is composed only of strong feathers. Thanks to the muscles, Birds have the ability to constantly change the shape and angle of their wings for masterful control in the air. There are 4 general wing shapes that are common in birds and that enable different types of flight. These are passive soaring, active soaring, elliptical wings, and high-speed wings. And then there are eggs. All birds lay eggs. Some are very colorful, others are covered with spots. Eggs are not unique to birds, of course, as fish, reptiles, amphibians, and insects also lay eggs. But a bird's egg has a hard shell made mostly of calcium and a layer of hardened mucus inside the egg. The developing embryo received nutrition from the yolk and the egg white. Unlike the ground nesting common nighthawk, whose eggs are pictured here, most birds construct nests to protect their eggs and then care for the eggs and the hatchlings. The majority of bird species are devoted parents. In most cases, both the male and the female care for the young. Bird songs are structured, usually complex vocalizations serving either or both of 2 purposes. 1, to defend territories, and 2, to attract mates. Most birdsong is by males. Both male and female birds, as well as juveniles, make many other vocalizations to communicate with one another. Although frogs also vocalize, bird songs are more complex. And I'm just going to play you a short audio piece about bird song and using this Pacific Rim as an example.
This is Bird Note. Listen carefully to the song of the Pacific wren.
I'm not sure if you're hearing.
What we hear as a blur of sound, the Pacific wren hears as a precise sequence of sounds. That birds can hear so acutely the fine structure of song allows them to convey much information in a short sound. That's probably why, naturalist Rosemary Jellis writes, even the most extensive bird songs seem so brief to us. Let's listen again, but this time with the song slowed down to 1/4 speed. Pacific wrens may hear the song of other Pacific wrens this way, enabling them to imitate each other. The same would be true for winter wrens of the eastern states and Eurasian wrens. Whatever the species, they remind us that creatures we share the world with read and respond to nature in ways we sometimes cannot see or hear. For BirdNote, I'm Mary McCann.
Support for BirdNote comes from Bloomsbury, a publisher of natural history books and birding guides. Critical Critters by Ralph Steadman and Carrie Levy is available now.
And hopefully you heard that. If you did not hear that, I can send a link to anybody who's interested in hearing that little clip about the Pacific wren from BirdNote. Over 270 species of birds make their home in the Canadian Rockies at some point in the year. Only a small portion of them stay here year-round, though. Most live in the valleys and up into the subalpine forest zone. Very few species can persist at the higher elevations, even in the summer. The bird species that you are most likely to see while hiking the GDT include 3 of the corvids. Here we have a Canada jay near Moraine Lake in Banff National Park, Alberta, and a Clark's nutcracker in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park, Alberta. A common raven near Numa Falls in Kootenay National Park, BC. These birds have several adaptations that enable them to withstand the winter. It's also possible to see common crows and black-billed magpies at a few low elevation locations. They have been able to persist because of food made available, often inadvertently, by people. Along some parts of the GDT, particularly west of the Great Divide and also in some parts of Waterton Lakes National Park, you may see British Columbia's provincial bird, the Steller's jay. The other types of birds you are almost guaranteed to see while on the GDT are grouse, particularly Franklin's grouse, a subspecies of the spruce grouse that's found in the Rocky Mountains. This male was along the Rockwall Trail in Kootenay National Park, British Columbia. And in addition, you're probably going to see the dusky grouse. This is the interior version of the blue grouse. This female dusky grouse is on the GDT, like right on the GDT, by Upper Waterton Lake. You might also see a ruffed grouse in some of the dry mountain valleys if you're really lucky. Then up high in the alpine zone, you could see white-tailed ptarmigan. The white-tailed ptarmigan is superbly adapted to snowy mountain environments. Seasonally molting to white plumage allows ptarmigan to conceal their whereabouts when on snowy ground. Another advantage of having a pale winter attire is that it has better insulating properties. White feathers lack melanin, the substance that is responsible for color. This leaves air spaces in the feathers. The air also scatters light, making these animals appear really bright white. As white-tailed, you might also see evidence of white-tailed ptarmigan by their dry, grouse-like scat. This is kind of interesting because it looks so unlike other types of bird poop, which is actually a combination of the urine and the feces, the usual kind of gooey white with the black center sort of poop that you see. As white-tailed ptarmigan have feathered feet to protect them from the cold and a shuffling walk, their tracks are quite distinctive, although they can fly. Ptarmigans generally prefer to walk, and this helps them conserve energy in their unforgiving alpine habitat. I'll just give you a little video clip here. In winter, this species occupies willow-dominated basins or riparian areas at or below tree line, where they lead a very sedentary lifestyle, roosting in snowbanks and feeding on willow buds. You can see this one is going after the willow buds there, and walking on top of the snow. That was up in Chickadee Valley in Kootenay National Park. While on the GDT, you will also see and hear a whole variety of woodpeckers, or see the excavations that they make in trees. Clockwise from the upper right, a baby hairy woodpecker, and this was along the Cirque Lake Trail in Banff National Park, Alberta, pileated woodpecker in Banff National Park, Alberta, and an American three-toed woodpecker at Lake O'Hara in Yoho National Park, British Columbia. As you hike through wooded areas along the GDT, you will see excavations in trees that have been made by woodpeckers. The nesting hole on the left could have been made by a three-toed or a hairy woodpecker. They both make round-shaped holes, but the rectangular excavations on the right are characteristic of pileated woodpeckers searching for carpenter ants in dead wood. The presence of woodpecker excavations is often what biologists look for to designate an official wildlife tree, since a variety of other vertebrates will also use these holes. So one of the other groups, and this is probably the biggest group, is the songbirds. And there's a huge variety of songbirds in the Rocky Mountains, from warblers to thrushes. Clockwise from the upper left, this is a pine grosbeak on a mountain ash tree, a yellow rumped warbler on a subalpine larch tree at MacArthur Lake in Yoho National Park, BC, a varied thrush on a mountain ash tree, and a horned lark in the alpine near Lake O'Hara in Yoho National Park, BC. Here are a couple of Townsend solitaires. This is a type of thrush that's related to the American robin. During the summer, they eat mostly insects, but in the winter, this songbird subsists almost entirely on the fleshy cones of junipers. Each Townsend solitaire sings a lovely warbling song throughout the fall and winter to set up and hold its winter territory. And then there are the water birds, and there's so many different water birds, from the golden-eyed ducks to loons, trumpeter swans. That one was in Elk Lakes, Elk Lake in Upper Elk Lake and Elk Lakes Provincial Park, and of course mergansers. Shorebirds are few and far between on alpine lakes, but you might glimpse or hear a spotted sandpiper. Great blue herons are unmistakable, but there are only a few low elevation lakes where you might see them. You are much more likely to see an American dipper. These amazing songbirds remain in the mountains year-round, feeding on aquatic invertebrates in fast-flowing streams. They catch their prey by plunging into the frigid water and swimming, often going for quite a long distance to go after their prey. The oil on this bird's outer feathers protects it from getting its inner downy feathers wet. We saw this American dipper at Lower Roe Lake in Waterton Lakes National Park, the one on the top, and the one below was at near Lake O'Hara in Yoho National Park, BC. Dippers have a really beautiful song, and you may hear them before you actually see them. The Great Divide area is home to over 20 species of birds of prey. Clockwise from the upper left, bald eagle, the hawk owl, the osprey, turkey vulture, and great horned owl are just a few of them. The Rocky Mountains witness the annual spring and fall migrations of golden eagles and 19 other species of birds of prey as they move from their spring, summer breeding grounds and their wintering grounds, thousands of kilometers to the south. They pass right over the major valleys and ridges to the east and west of the Great Divide. Volunteers with the Rocky Mountain Eagle Research Foundation track the migrations and report on trends, and they've been doing this for over 30 years. Before we leave the birds, I'd like to share one of the quintessential bird songs of the GDT with you, and that is of the hermit thrush. How does this and other thrushes create such fine music? The answer is that the birds have a double voice box. Birdsong emanates from a complex structure unique to birds called the syrinx. Syrinx is the Greek word for the musical instrument called the panpipes, which have multiple pipes. And like panpipes, birds have two separate pipes to sing with. A fine singer, like a hermit thrush, can voice notes independently and simultaneously from each half of its syrinx, notes that blend brilliantly as ethereal, harmonious tones. And lucky for us, the results are really lovely and haunting. So I'll just play that one more time. There are beautiful songs in all of the thrushes. Swainson's thrushes spiral up, veery thrushes spiral down. The varied thrush sounds like a whistle and a hum at the same time at different pitches, and the hermit thrush goes up and down. That concludes my summary of the fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds in the Great Divide area. To wrap up this webinar, I'll just share a few thoughts on what we can do to appreciate and safeguard nature on the Great Divide when on and off the trail. There are many excellent field guides that you can use to identify the flora and fauna of the Canadian Rockies, especially birds. Due to the weight of the field guides, it is best to carry them just on short day trips and use them to build up your identification skills before going on the GDT. The apps are improving, although you cannot always trust the artificial intelligence identifications, especially when you just have evidence of animals such as tracks, scat, feathers, or other sign. The Merlin app is really amazing for identifying bird calls, but it does use a lot of the resources of the iPhone, so you have to be a little bit careful about that. It's a really good idea to use Merlin and iNaturalist and it will really improve your identification skills. There's many different organizations in Canada that support learning about fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds. eBird, like iNaturalist, allows you to report on what you see and hear, and FrogWatch allows you to do that as well. And in that way, you get to contribute to a database that can be used to track what species of bird or amphibian are where and when. One of the most important things you can do as a GDT hiker is to help safeguard nature along the GDT is to adhere to no trace backcountry principles. Just type in no trace backcountry principles in your browser and read the material that's under each of the 7 principles before you go. I'll just highlight one that we really want to be careful of, especially in view of whirling disease and its effect on fish. And that's to prevent polluting the waters of the Great Divide area. So in order to do that, be sure you wash off any insect repellent and sunscreen before you jump in an alpine lake or stream in the areas outside the national parks where you're still allowed to swim. Better yet, use a portable shower and or a thermos to keep yourself clean at camp. And then wash your dishes and do your evening and morning ablutions with water that you take from a nearby water source, but do it away from that water source. Never defecate or urinate near water sources. And in case someone else did do that, always filter the water you plan to use for drinking. Next to habitat destruction and fragmentation, invasive alien species are the major threat to biodiversity. And you can do your part to prevent the spread of invasive alien species into the Great Divide area. A key action is to clean your hiking boots and other gear before and after you hike the GDT. Before your trip, never bring firewood from outside the Great Divide area to a campground in the Rockies. And if you fish, don't move fishing bait species from one area to another or release bait species. Take pictures of any species you suspect is an invasive alien species and post the pictures on iNaturalist after your trip and report any confirmed sightings of alien invasive species to Parks Canada. Aquatic plants and animals that are not native to Canada can become aquatic invasive species if they are released into our waters. Under the federal aquatic invasive species regulations, it is illegal to introduce an aquatic species into a body of water where it is not native, unless authorized under federal, provincial, or territorial law. And you can help prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species by never releasing aquarium pets, water, or garden plants, live food, or live bait into rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, or even storm sewers. Sport fish can only be released back into the waters from which they were caught, i.e. catch and release, and never moved from one body of water to another. Other general measures to prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species include learning about them, including how to recognize them, and cleaning, draining, and drying any equipment used in the water before storing it or moving it to a different body of water. In the fall of 2023, Parks Canada introduced a series of measures to try to slow or prevent the spread of whirling disease to fish in the mountain national parks. These include prohibiting fishing, swimming, diving, or wading, or using a watercraft of any kind in any park waters. And this includes stand-up paddle boards, which people seem to think don't apply to this, but they do. In the summer, people cannot even hike, walk, or cycle within 3 meters of any water course or water body unless it's on an approved or an official trail, bridge, or ford. One can collect treatable water for drinking or hygienic purposes, like to fill a solar shower. It's good to know that all of the efforts and investments that the GDTA and government land management agencies have made in recent years to build bridges over water courses along the GDT will help prevent the spread of whirling disease. That includes this video on the fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds of the GDT area. The next video in the Nature of the Great Divide series will deal with the groups within the vertebrates that we're most familiar with, the mammals. If you have questions after listening to this video about the fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds that live in the vicinity of the Great Divide, please put them in the YouTube comments along with your contact information, and you will receive an answer. Happy trails.